sometimes there is an unspoken question behind the spoken questions that we ask one another. There was a husband and wife going out to dinner. The wife asked her husband a simple question: "Where do you want to eat?" And he said, "How about Billy Bob's Cajun Extravaganza?" She winced her face immediately and said, "Little too spicy, anything more meat and potatoes." "Well, there's always the Hamburger Inn." "Well, they don't have a liquor license, and I was thinking of a glass of wine before dinner." Well, the guy tries to up his game and says, "How about the local steakhouse that was in town?" She reminded him that they'd had a bad experience the last time they went there. Well, the husband's getting a little flustered, and he said, "Where do you want to go?" And she said, "How about the family table restaurant right down the street?" Then she added, "But it's up to you." Well, it was never really up to him, because there was a big question behind the little questions, and it was an unspoken question. Do you love me? Where am I at in our relationship? Do my opinions count? Would you be willing to defer for me? That's the larger question behind the smaller questions being said. If we're wise, we're going to consider the big question that's often unspoken, but that is behind the questions that are being asked. And if we're really wise, we're going to consider the big question behind the questions that we ask, and that we ask even God. Our prayerful questions: can I have this? Or remove that from my life? Or why did you allow this to happen? What did I do to deserve that? Because it behooves us to know the big question, which is the title of our message for today, we're going to explore the big questions that were being asked behind the questions the people of Israel were speaking as they were being delivered from the land of bondage and transported to the land of promise. The whole Israelite community set out from the desert of sin, traveling from place to place as the Lord commanded. The Lord is the commander here. And he started off by commanding Pharaoh, "Let my people go." Pharaoh wasn't inclined to do it, so God sent 10 plagues to adjust Pharaoh's attitude. And finally, he let God's people go. They followed a sign God put in the sky, a pillar of cloud by day, a pillar of fire by night. He led them out of the land of bondage. And about that time, Pharaoh's rethinking what he's done, realizing he needs those immigrants who were willing to do the dirty work for a pittance. And so he goes out to get them. He gets his army together, chases after them. They find themselves then with the army coming after them and a seemingly insurmountable obstacle in the Red Sea before them. But God does a miracle. He separates the Red Sea. The people walk through. And the Egyptian army chases them on into the dry land between the Red Sea. And once the people of Israel come out, the water crashes in, utterly destroying a vastly superior military force that had been chasing them. Well, God is leading them. He's the one that decides where they go. He leads them into the wilderness of uncertainty. God is testing his people, and he's going to find out if his people will follow his lead, even if he leads them into great uncertainty. How about when they get out in the wilderness and their stomachs start growling for food? How then will they follow his lead? My son Jim Bob has always had a healthy appetite. When we go on vacations, everything would be just fine as we would drive along until he started getting hungry, and then the situation would quickly deteriorate. And I like to get some miles under our belt, and so I would try to appease him or buy some time. I'd point to a rise way off in the distance. I go, Jim, way off there, just when we get over that far rise, there's an exit there and all kind of eateries. I had no idea what was over there, but I thought maybe he'd fall asleep while we were driving over there. So off we would go. He might close his eyes, but once we went over the rise and there was no exit and no eateries, he'd prop open an eye and say, "There's no food here." And that's what the Israelites are saying. There's no food here in the wilderness. How are we going to get something to eat? Well, God provided food for them in the form of bread from heaven. It was called manna. When the dew would evaporate in the morning, there would be this flaky substance. And they could gather it and form it into loaves, and they could bake it just like bread, and it was delicious, and it was nutritious. And God also sent flocks of quail for them to gather as meat. They came across some fouled water, tainted water, but God showed them a miraculous way of transforming it into delicious, sweet, and fresh water that was perfectly good to drink. But then he led them forth into the desert, and whatever water we're able to collect is rarely going to be enough to last us very long. You see, God's testing his people. He's the commander here. He's leading them into these situations for the specific purpose of testing their faith. Did they learn the lesson about his daily provision for their food and their water? Well, the only way to find out is to test them again. They camped at Rephidim, but there was no water for the people to drink. So they quarreled with Moses and said, "Give us water to drink." Moses replied, "Why do you quarrel with me? Why do you put the Lord to the test?" This is always what happens when the Lord tests his people test him right back. They test his patience. They want what they want. When they don't get it, they get testy. But the people were thirsty for water there, and they grumbled against Moses. "Why did you bring us up out of Egypt to make us and our children and livestock die of thirst?" Then Moses cried out to the Lord, "What am I to do with these people? They are almost ready to stone me." The Israelites' quarreling had escalated into grumbling against God's servant. And we might feel a little sorry for God's servant here. He's the spiritual leader of God's people. And when, people sometimes misdirect their anger at God against God's servant, and we're just about to be tempted to be sorry for Pastor Moses. But don't be too sorry for him, because just like God tests his people, so he tests his pastors. And just like God provides for his people, so he provides for his pastors. The Lord answered Moses, "Walk on ahead of the people. Take with you some of the elders of Israel, and take in your hand the staff with which you struck the Nile, and go." You remember those 10 plagues that adjusted Pharaoh's attitude. The first one happened when Moses was commanded to take his staff and touch the Nile River. It transformed the water into blood, killed all the frogs and the fish, made a big mess of things. And that staff was used many times in those 10 plagues so that it became a symbol of God's presence and power among his people, power to save them. God says, take that staff and go to this desert, dry rock and hit it with the staff. And that's exactly what he does, and water burst forth. "I will stand there before you by the rock at Horeb. Strike the rock and water will come out of it for all the people to drink." So Moses did this in the sight of the elders of Israel. Problem solved. Water comes out. The elders are going, this is good water. Bring the containers here. Fill them up. Unfortunately, the people's faith is not so victorious as God's promises to provide. They're grumbling and they're quarreling and their testiness and testing of God shows their lack of faith. And that's how the place came to be named. And Moses called the place Massah and Meribah because the Israelites quarreled and because they tested the Lord, saying, is the Lord among us or not? Meribah is a Hebrew word that means quarrel, and Massah is a Hebrew word that means testing. And they tested God by asking the question, is the Lord among us or not? Now, I don't know about you, but in that text, I didn't read anywhere where the people are asking, is the Lord among us or not? I went back through all the chapters in Exodus up to this point and never once find the people asking, is the Lord among us or not? But you remember, sometimes the big questions are unstated. Remember that woman at the beginning, the wife, and you know, she's asking this question, but the big question is, do you love me? And the big question that is unstated, but that the Bible cuts right to the quick and gives us the big question, is the Lord among us or not? Is there a God? Is he powerful? Does he promise to save us and to provide for us? Is the Lord among us or not? Now, this is after 6 months has not gone by. And in that period of time, God has sent 10 plagues. God has separated the Red Sea, destroyed a vastly superior Egyptian army. He has sent meat and bread from heaven. He has brought water forth from desert rocks, and the people are asking, is the Lord with us or not? Reminds me of a Janet Jackson song. What have you done for me lately? I don't care about the diamonds last month. What have you done for me lately, Lord? Is the Lord among us or not? God's people have this history of grumbling at the first hint of adversity, despite the spectacular things God has done for them in their past, in their recent past, but the first hint of adversity, and they start grumbling. Well, adversity does have, ironically, this is irony, the redeeming value of bringing forth the big question. Is the Lord among us or not? A similar irony on the other side of the coin, we would think normally how easy it is to believe in God and trust in God when everything is going our way. You would think that, wouldn't you? But you know, when everything goes our way, we're actually inclined to forget about God. We may pay lip service, but you remember that story about daily bread. The author of Proverbs had an interesting thing to say about that. He prayed to God, give me only my daily bread, otherwise I may have too much and disown you and say, who is the Lord? You know, everything's going our ways. I've got a good gig going. And then God asks us to share out of our abundance for others in need, and we go, maybe God doesn't know what he's talking about right now. I got a good thing going. And we forget about God. And we say, who is the Lord? So this is the irony. This is the irony. Adversity has a redeeming effect. You know, if we start asking, who is the Lord? Why did I need the Lord? You better believe the Lord's going to answer the question. And he's going to do it by bringing adversity into our lives, because adversity has a redeeming effect of prompting the big question in us. And this is worth remembering when we're in the midst of present adversity. And it's worth remembering when other people are in the midst of adversity. You know, most people, we should understand this, who come to this church for the first time, a guest or a visitor, you can pretty much count on this, that they have been through some major upheaval recently. Well, maybe they've relocated to our town. That's a stressful thing. The kids are uprooted from their old school district and all their friends. They come to a strange place, and we got to find the grocery store and everywhere else. It's a stressful thing. Or there's been a divorce. Or somebody has died. Or somebody has lost a job. Usually, somebody's in the wilderness of uncertainty asking the big question, is the Lord with me or not? Where would you go to get the answer to that question? You'd go to the Lord's house. You'd come. When you see somebody who's just moved here, you could pretty much count on something has been going on. And what are they going to find here? They're going to find a fellowship of people who are struggling with the big question and who are finding that, yes, when we look back over our lives, and don't have to look back very far many times, when we were facing trials, the Lord was with us, providing manna from heaven. He was protecting us from the Egyptian army who was out to undo us. And He was leading us in the way we should go. When we begin to reflect back upon life, the big answer makes itself known, but only when the big question has prompted the big answer. So whatever situation we may be in right now, whatever adversity we are facing, whatever trials, whatever crosses we're being called to bear, may those have the redeeming effect of prompting the big question so that we can discover the big answer day by day. Please rise.